Bonjour à tous, bienvenue.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this discussion. How is the crisis reshaping the world map? It's a topic that's as wide as the map itself, but it's true that very soon after the pandemic, we heard the expression, the afterworld. We would see that the world would never be the same again. This is reshaping main commercial balances, which countries are growing up, what are the lacks that are appearing and the failures, what are the assets. But to answer that, we have several people. We have Florence Parly, who's a minister of the armed forces, Michel Barnier, former chief negotiator for Brexit. Good evening, Michel. We have Sven Smith with us, chairman and director senior of McKinsey Global Institute. We have Rodolphe Sade, chairman and CEO of CMIA CGM, a maritime transport company. And in Boston, we have Suzanne Berger, American politologist who is a professor at the MIT. But to start, let me give the floor to Philippe Aguillon, who will coordinate the discussion. He's the professor at the Collège de France and member of the Cercle des Économistes. This crisis has highlighted some assets and some failures or weaknesses. Absolutely, says Philippe Aguillon. I believe that the merit of this crisis is that it has highlighted some weaknesses we should deal with. We knew they were there, but they were highlighted by the crisis even more. In the beginning, for example, in France, we didn't have any masks, any breathing equipment, any tests, and we tried to look into that, and we realized that at the beginning of the year 2000, we were more or less like the Germans, and now the Germans are exporting, and they have a net excedent of 20 billion euros on these products, and we have stagnated. So what happened in our countries? First of all, the control of value chains. Do we have to recover control over the value chains through the relocation of Chinese plants, or do we have to push new companies and create a new ecosystem to help them grow? So the whole issue is how we recover control over the value chain. And we realized that it was a lack of innovation in all sectors apart from the nuclear sector and aeronautical sector. And France has lost ground because it lost innovation. So it has to create a new innovation ecosystem. And it's not only true for France, but for the rest of Europe as well. So how can we create a better system for the vaccines? The famous BARDA enabled the transformation of messenger RNA into vaccines. So we didn't have the same. What should we do in France, in each country, at European level? Should we do it all 27 countries? Should we include England? I think so. I think that in this Europe of projects, the key countries are in France, Germany, and in my opinion, UK as well. For defense, for example, they're very good. How can they be reintegrated into the game? That's one of the main questions. The second question will be, is it enough to have DAFA? Do we need to review the whole system of innovation? We will hear that it's not enough to have DAFAs if you haven't got a good system for basic research. In the U.S. have National Science Foundation, National Health Institute, and foundations. They have institutional equity. They have a lot of systems. And how can we create that? We haven't got that. And then comes the problem of Maastricht. I'm in favor of the criteria from Maastricht, but if we invest into projects, do we have to count in the same way gross investment and a pure transfer? When you look at Maastricht, And someone could say, okay, I can pretend that an investment is an investment for growth. How can we use an indicator like the PISA tests or the Shanghai classification? For patents, for example, we know that there are very specific metrics so that you get the impression that you're really investing for growth. So how can we organize something so that countries are not only judged based on their deficit, but on the use of and the quality of public spending? How can we have this culture even more in Europe? This is the question I asked from our participants, and I'm reaching the end of my 5 minutes. Should we fear China? We know that the number of Chinese patents has exploded recently, but are they good patents? Are they really at the border, at the real technological innovations? Are they dangerous innovation-wise for Europe, competitive-wise? And the Biden administration at one point said we should get rid of patents for vaccines in order to distribute them much better. And that's a question because patents are really a reward for innovators. And if you no longer reward them, you discourage innovation. But on the other hand, you have to be able to distribute this. My colleague, Michael Kremer, economic Nobel for 96, said that states could buy innovations from innovators and put them in the public domain. How can we have a system like that? Can the G20 play a role in that? Can we create a collective sovereign wealth funds to purchase innovations of vaccines or green technology and distribute them in developing countries? So there's something to be looked at in order to integrate everything: health, green innovation, and fairer rules for trade. These are the questions I asked from the participants. I believe COVID really has a merit because it has highlighted these questions. And as even though I said earlier on that the Americans should review their social model, but in Europe we can always improve our social model. But we have an innovation ecosystem that is not appropriate, so we have to see how we can reconquer the value chain to have a Europe of innovation and a Europe of projects, including Great Britain. Thank you very much, Philippe Aguillon. I see that people are... Florence Parly, I see that you're applauding. Would you say Europe at present is at a crossroad and has to make huge decisions in order to make headway? Answer, yes, I believe that Europe is at a crossroad. But before I answer the question about Europe, I would like to say that seen from the window of the Minister of the Armed Forces, where we look at geopolitical elements from close, we see that the crisis has had huge consequences because we didn't discover the stresses and the tensions in the world. We knew that they were there before the sanitary crisis, but we have seen it accelerated, and this crisis has really amplified all the forces at work between the countries and the various powers. So what does this acceleration lead to? Well, we've seen the increase in the new threats. We've seen this. We knew about cyber attacks, but we've seen that they were multiplied by 4 between 2019 and 2020. The number of cyber attacks was multiplied by a factor of 4. This is remarkable. We also saw that information was being manipulated to a large extent. People were saying, is there a real pandemic? Yes or no? Some people thought it was no. And some, in fact, still think there was no pandemic. Are these vaccines really efficient? So information was really being manipulated, and they fed on the crisis, really. And then there were some behaviors from global powers or regional powers. We saw some behaviors cutting loose, really. Something that was not possible a few years ago became possible. I could mention things I've already mentioned. A Turkish boat coming to threaten a French ship that is that is carrying a NATO operation. We saw that a year and a half ago. And we saw the exacerbation of economic rivalry between China and the US. It's nothing new, but it will not be reduced because of the crisis. I believe it will be even amplified, and whatever the administration in charge in the US is. We also, countries closing up. We saw borders being closed up without any consultation, even within the EU. And the temptation to keep what you had. And we saw also some extraordinary behaviors from European countries that maybe were not as impacted as we were, or Spain or Italy a year ago, that opened up their hospitals, that took in patients that needed taking care of. So I believe that this crisis has shown in Europe incredible fragilities, a high level of dependence that is even endangering or jeopardizing our level of sovereignty. And when I talk about sovereignty in view of my responsibilities, it has a lot of meaning. But it has also highlighted incredible opportunities, because I believe that, in fact, the people are really aware of things, becoming aware, and Europe has the ability to speed up and to try and reduce our vulnerabilities, and to create an ecosystem that is more favorable to innovation in an area that the armed forces have never let go, i.e. the nuclear technology and the aeronautical technology. So this is a possibility, provided that Europe does not attack at legal level the policies where we want to invest at European level. I'm thinking in particular about taxonomy, saying that nuclear is not a good technology. It means shooting yourself in the foot. And you can't put at the same level financial activities and pornographic activities. So I will stop at that, because I know that my time is out. Thank you, Florence Parly. We'll come back to this European issue with Michel Barnier, but let us go to the U.S. and talk to Susan Berger from Boston. You wanted to talk about innovation. We've seen the emergence of innovation after this crisis. There is a strong innovation impulse in the U.S. That was started because of the crisis. Yes, but what I have seen emerge on the international scene is a globalization with national borders. And the dilemma, in my opinion, is to know how we can maintain this world as open as possible. Borders can be a limitation to economics, because all these countries are adopting large-scale industrial policies. And by definition, this kind of policy supports national companies, national workers, national innovation, and national preference. So these policies create barriers at the border to prevent the free circulation of ideas, people, capitals, equity, and goods and services, even in the absence of new tariffs or quotas. So when countries have a large-scale industrial policy, how can we maintain an international economic order that is open and based on rules? Is it possible to maintain globalization in such a world? In fact, should we wish for that? Should we desire it? I believe we must first start to understand why we are seeing this increasing industrial policies everywhere. And there have been three factors to this. First of all, the most obvious one is a response to populism and the public request for a more active role of the states to guarantee jobs and a certain safety and security. Secondly, it's a response to the Chinese increasing competition in innovation sectors, communication, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, robotics, etc. And the advance of China, the progress of China in these areas is all the more important since these technologies are the ones where you have a convergence between civil and military technologies. But I nevertheless think that the most important factor has been the pandemic. In the US, the pandemic has gotten rid of the deep hostility of the American public towards the industrial policy, the possibility for the state to identify the winners. This negative judgment has been overturned during the pandemic. In our country, like in France and elsewhere, there has been a lack of protective equipment, breathing equipment, masks, etc. in the first phase of the pandemic. So people saw the hospital workers wearing dustbin bag, garbage bags on their head to protect themselves. And they realized how fragile our supply chains were. In order to make our supply chains more resilient, obviously, everyone realized that the state had to act. And more important even, to change the mind of people. There was the surprising success of cooperation between the public and private sector to quickly develop messenger RNA vaccines, and also for the very complex production of these vaccines. This success really overturned the public opinion towards the industrial policy, and without this success of this Operation Warp Speed, the adoption by the Congress of the Frontier Act by the Biden administration, from the Biden administration last week, couldn't have been possible.
So how can we explain this? Let me explain a little bit about the success of the vaccines. So the Federal Agency for Advanced Defense Projects played an extremely important role. Without fundamental research in genomics, and more precisely, fundamental research carried out in the laboratory in Pennsylvania University well beyond 2005, nothing would have been possible. Even with DARPA, even with those huge public and private programs, Operation Warp Speed, dating back to November 2020, it took 15 years of research in a lab to get vaccines into the arms of Americans in 2021. So without funding for fundamental research, there's no point in having a DARPA. However, some elements of industrial policy are different. They see a DARPA as being a shortcut, whereas in the States we have different proposals for agencies for energy, health, semiconductors and batteries. In the United Kingdom, there are proposals for advanced research and invention agency. In France, there are big challenges, deep tech, the technology of the future, and they all belong to the DARPA family. Sadly, I have to cut you off, Susan Berger. Apologies for this. Can you wrap up, please, because we are very short of time. Apologies for hurrying you along like this. Okay, I'm about to close. The important thing is to know in the industrial policy that we have today, how can we defend an open world? And in my university, I see that there is concrete pressure to close up the university to the Chinese, to work less with Chinese in sensitive areas. So this question of impact on our system, our industrial system, and the relationships between industrial sectors and the international world, well, it's so very important. Apologies for having overrun my time. No problem. Well, that gives us food for thought. Michel Barnier, we've talked about many, many things. What is your vision of the crisis? How has it reshaped the map of the world? Do you believe it's been impactful for different qualitative and quantitative phenomena? First of all, good evening to everybody. I would like to thank the Circle for inviting me here. Of course, I echo what Florence Parly say. I can applaud what she said. I'm not going to go over the points. I'll just come back to one of the points she made in a paper which I had prepared. I do not think that this crisis has changed the paradigm of world debate. I think this crisis has sped up, as you said, Madam Minister, the tendencies and the strategies that we already know about. For us Europeans, we're patriotic, we're European. This debate, which is becoming more heated between the United States and China and Asia in general, is something which we are looking at. And there was the recent election, which we were thrilled with, and I only hope that we don't I think that our relationship works very well with Mr. Biden. We were glad that he was elected. And his strategy remains the same, America the first. And all of the Americans are trying to bring us on board in terms of their dialogue with China. We are allies of the Americans. We will remain their allies on condition that this alliance does not mean allegiance. That's my first point. So, apart from the United States and China, which is has a vaccine strategy which is more or less successful. There are influence, and we can see the influence there. In this world today, there are many strong players. You can see that there's a relationship between China and Russia there in terms of research and biotechnology. Given the landscape, which is becoming more contrasted, the Europeans have an even greater responsibility. We have to know what we want. And for a very long time, I thought that the European Union was right to have their supermarkets, their wonderful market, their unique market. Despite what the British are saying, we have a unique market, a single market, which exists mainly, which is why the Americans and the Chinese respect us, because we have so many standards, regulations, there's so much supervision, and there are jurisdictions which we have patiently built up. And the English have left all that behind. So I think this is essential for our survival, for us to be able to have ambitions, to want to be a global player. And play our role on the global stage. To getting back to the questions which Philippe put earlier on, the COVID crisis has revealed weaknesses. That cannot be denied, because we were not able to ward the crisis off or to forecast it. I think we can draw lessons for the future crises. Ladies and gentlemen, let's not put our head in the sand. There will be more crises, particularly with global warming and the internationalization of transport. I am sure in Brussels we're going to learn from our past experience, and in the future we will prepare more prevention and answers. I think in terms of ecology, prevention can be more expensive than repairing. However, when you heal something, or you may have to improvise. However, there is good news. Europe's choice to pool the vaccines was good news, and it complies with European values in terms of the bigger and the smaller countries in Europe. The recovery plan, we want to get through this crisis, and for the very first time we decided to borrow together so that we could invest together. I'm not a protectionist. I'm quite liberal. I think we were very naive in our exchanges with the Americans and the rest of the world. We were too naive. We have to demand reciprocity. But the solution is not protectionism. The better protection is to be able to invest together. And this is the very first time. This is the very first time we've got 750 billion euros that we're going to be investing in some very important projects. There's the digital challenge. There's the Green Deal, which has already been put in place. It was put in place already, but it's going to be amplified. These are all items of good news. And the fact that there is also a commitment towards an industrial policy, that's good news as well. However, ladies and gentlemen, it is a question of policy. Do we want to be a global player and participate in this multilateral dialogue and not just be outsourcers or just not have the right influence? I would just like to finish with Mr. Cameron's table. Do you remember Mr. Cameron? He's the one who insisted that they have a referendum in England. So he tried to convince the Brits that they should stay in the single unit and the single market, and he had a table there of 10 most important countries from 2010, 2020, 2030, 2050. And this table, there are still 4 countries: Germany, UK, if I can still refer to them, France and Italy. And every 4 years, there's one of them disappears from the table. Every 10 years, one disappears from the table. In 2050, Germany is 9th and on the way out. And that was a table that everybody can understand, including those people who talked about British populism and French nationalists. What I want to say is that we have to rely on our single market, otherwise we are doomed. We become spectators of our own destiny. And so that is the key in all of the debates which are about to open up. You'll always hear me say that we absolutely have to be European as well as being patriotic, because if we are not together, then we are not at the table. And there's no point in making fancy speeches here in X or elsewhere. We will no longer be in a position to participate in that dialogue and that confrontation, to defend our values and our industrial strategy and our freedom and our independence. Thank you very much. So at this point in the debate, it's very interesting to hear the head of a big business, an international maritime company. So Sven Smith, your business is a wonderful barometer in terms of commercial exchanges and the situation today. How have you noted the impact of this crisis on the world and your business, more precisely, perhaps? Well, thank you very much. Well, the first comment which I would like to make is that what we have noted as a transport company and logistics company is that the world map has not been reshaped, but it has new priorities, the players, and which direction we have to head in. As far as the map is concerned, the United States are stronger now after the crisis. Their economy has demonstrated its strength. Europe has bounced back. Asia, particularly China, remains and will remain the grain store of the world. Sadly, we have seen the weakness of emerging countries. We have noted an increase in regional traffic and international traffic, and that's what we have observed in our business sector. As far as the players are concerned around the world, we have noted that businesses are playing an increasingly fundamental role, because businesses today manage to find solutions, particularly businesses that are linked to the pharmaceutical sector or others that can produce vaccines. And you also have transport and logistics companies that distribute the vaccines around the world. The crisis has also shown the importance of digital technologies. Obviously, without COVID, we would never have had the remote meeting last year that we had. The Cercle des Économistes was remote. That was because of COVID. And of course, we've all been doing remote work from home through Zoom because of COVID. And the way vaccines are distributed in the future will change, but this digital technology will remain with us in the future. We noted a strengthening of the different organizations around the world, the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization. In relation to the situation we've been through, they have shown how important, how strong they are. This crisis has also determined priorities. First of all, health. And as a transport and logistics group, our workers are at the very top of our list of priorities. The climate program. Today, it's difficult to pretend that the environmental problem is not there. As a maritime transport company, we have invested in biomethane, for example. The environment is so important. If we don't all take care of our environment, then we will have a serious problem on our hands. The fight against inequalities, access to vaccines, good example here. Sadly, we are seeing that the emerging countries still do not have access to the vaccine. And I was talking with the OMC head to offer our help distributing the vaccine. It is clear that we have noted that the sovereignty of certain countries has been increased, and this will possibly have a negative impact on world trade. Thank you very much for listening. And to round up, I'm going to address Sven Smith. You, I think, want to look at the on and off sides of this story.
I can hear everything in French, but I can't speak it well enough. I just want to say the map of the world is changing, in my view, quite significantly. It's actually changing every week. But the biggest way in which it's changing, in my view, is an acceleration. We know very little at this moment about lives and livelihoods. Actually, we still don't know why the virus collapsed between January and March. We also don't have good models to explain what happened to the economy last year, which was a pretty quick recovery, actually a light switch economy. But what we do know is that digital accelerated, e-commerce accelerated, the enormous scale by which we stimulated the economy accelerated, and even work from home and education from home accelerated. So what of that is going to stay? In my view, that's very simple. If we all like it and it works, it's going to stay. If we don't like it, it won't. So telemedicine jumped from 10% to 85% first-line contact. It's going to stay. The doctor likes it, the patient likes it, the regulator likes it. Education from home, the kids don't like it, the parents don't like it, the teachers don't like it, but for some resistance pockets in the US, and they think we're going to go back to education. So to me, as we exit COVID, the big question is actually not so much which quarter do we exit, but to what do we exit? And the beauty that we have to one of Philip's questions is the productivity potential to grow substantially in the next decade exists, to grow sustainably exists, and to grow inclusively exist. If you look at the history of recoveries out of a deep crisis, there are recoveries where the economy gets lifted 30 to 50% in a decade, or 10 to 20%. And I think we should all be discussing which of these futures we go to. 30 to 50% lift in the next decade is going to be much better much better than 10 to 20 for sustainability, for inclusion, and for prosperity for all, and health. And we believe it's possible because we've seen in the acceleration of digital, the future of work, that the possibility to get that growth exists, and so the glass is half full. And the stories that are now developing about how fast we have accelerated the innovation of health could actually mean that we will get a massive reduction in cancer and in malaria that could be bigger than the lives lost during the pandemic. And while the pandemic was extremely tough for lives and livelihoods, for me the real question is, could we discuss whether we will gain more than we lost in the next decade as we exit COVID? And it's not because we don't have the possibility. The available science exists to give every person on the planet 10 years more quality life. The available productivity exists to add 1% of economic growth to prosperity for everybody on the planet. But we should discuss it. And what I feel very good about this pandemic is that we've been learning together. And the question for me is, in a year from now, will we look back when there's a parliamentary inquiry with an inquisitive negative, which says what went wrong, or will we look with an inquisitive positive that says what did we actually do right? And we did a lot of things right. And then we might look back 10 years from now and look back at this pandemic and say this was not the COVID-19 depression, this was the COVID-19 acceleration. And that's my hope.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. We still have some 20 minutes for the Q&A. So I'd like to go back on this agreement reached at the OECD for the reform of the taxation system of multinationals, which redraws this world map, fiscally at least. Is it a takeover by the states, as Christine Lagarde was saying, the president of the BCE earlier? François Paris, can we say that the time of fiscal optimization in all directions is behind us? I don't know, because it's a decisive step that was attained, but I think we have to agree on the conditions of implementation. I would like to say also that it's not a miracle that is just happening like Father Christmas or like Santa Claus coming down the chimney. It's the result of fights, struggles that were costly for some. And when I think of some social professional categories who really suffered from that, so I'm very happy that this fight can lead to a possible implementation that will reduce the possibilities of tax optimization or fiscal optimization. I'm saying reduce, I'm not saying getting rid of fiscal optimizations, but it's an excellent news and we greet it very warmly. But I would say that it's work that has mobilized a lot of countries. It was made possible because there was a political dialogue that was re-established, but we're starting from very far. I mean, Monsieur Barnier, I'm sorry. It's good news for you. Is it the Biden effect, or is it the effect of the crisis? Years of efforts, Florence Parly just mentioned. Obviously, it's not Mr. Trump that would have had this idea. The arrival of President Biden changed things, and as Florence mentioned, after work to which the French authorities took part and European authorities, also that we lead to this tax. We hope that we will continue along that path and imagine a tax to which I was in favor when I was the honor of being the European Commissioner to Financial Services, a tax on financial services. So $600 billion of derivative exchanges. If we could find money to face poverty in Africa, to face the climate challenge, and more justice, only these two challenges, which have consequences everywhere, we will need a tax like that one. And since we are on the path of hope on fiscal aspects, we hope we make lines move, make things change in Europe. You all know, but this goes through a change in the internal rules in Europe to avoid fiscal optimizations in the unique market. So it's a change in the rule of unanimous decisions. But it's good news. Suzanne Berger, maybe seen from the States agreement. What do you do? that an effect? I think that the large majority of American citizens were shocked to hear that Apple, Amazon, and the others did not pay income tax or taxes. But I think I share the worries of Mr. Saad, who has just took the floor earlier on the question to know whether these rules on global fiscality, what would be the impact on developing countries, on emerging economies? Will, in the end, if they cannot use the strategies that Ireland, for example, used in another time to attract activity on its soil, and large corporations, delocalizations, and so on and so forth, will this be a disadvantage for them? I'm wondering. Maybe a comment from our panel, some thoughts for reflection? No. Yes, Philippe Gaillon, you have a... I think the fiscal changes, what's interesting there is that it's the right way to operate. We know that we need to make changes, but in France, we thought that we wanted to increase the tax on capital in France. We already have severe taxes here, but at the level, the international level, we tax excessive added values. We impose minimum rates in countries, so there's no arbitration. Maybe I establish rules where you make profit, if you're a French citizen, you pay in France, whatever. But with rules like that, we can go very far. And I think it's a good way to do things when it comes to fiscal aspects. I just wanted to add this comment. We have a little time to talk with us after? Yes, maybe. So you also raised the issue of the climate. Obviously, we had confirmation yesterday that there was a heat record in the Antarctic. 20.3 degrees of urgent measures need to be taken. And we also have, Florence Parly, this decision from the State Council that France doesn't do enough to respect its commitments regarding climate change. And now they have 9 months to take urgent measures. How will the government correct its path? Well, I can't say I have the answer on to this question, but nobody can contest the fact that in the consequences of the crisis we need to manage more than ever the issue of climate warming must find an answer, and it's one of the objectives of the EU to enable the states through the financing of the recovery plan to really invest strongly on things that will have a positive impact in terms of slowing down the climate warming. I'm not going to comment the method or the approach. Nobody can go against the fact that we need to do more and faster. The climate that we suffer from every day shows that there are some severe changes. After that, we can talk about the method, but the State Council is right to attract the attention, to draw the attention on these aspects. I hope that the method will be efficient. As we would say in the Parliament, it's just a call for a change, call for an amendment. Green innovation, yes, Monsieur Barnier, Michel Barnier. I just want to say a few words echoing to what Suzanne was saying from Washington. She was saying that we were very shocked that Google, find out that Google, Amazon, Apple did not pay taxes. She's talking about the U.S., but we even more shocked than she was. We found that even more shocking. That was the first thing I wanted to say. It's true that we have this minimum taxation of those GAFA giants. But Philip, they said there's no question that we will not increase taxes on businesses in France. There's no question doing that. We're really already way up there in France. So the choice for the years to come is to say we want to free French businesses, and that really is a burden on our competitivity, notably compared to Germany. It's good that the U.S. increased; they have a lot of margin there. But in this field, we're beyond the limit. But when it comes to climate change, I was a bit surprised with this decision of the State Council. But for sure, there's no world global debate. No national or European debate if we don't take into account this reality that the GIEC, the IPCC will suffer from. I have the honor of presiding a department which is east of here, northeast of here in Savoie. A third of the economy lies on the snow. So here we're in a wine country. You must see, I understand the time where the harvesting becomes earlier and earlier. It's 5 weeks earlier in 30 years, so it changes everything. It changes our ways of transporting, building, growing, when it comes to farming, exchanging. So the responsibility and the political courage means that we have to prepare for these changes. So you wanted to say something? There are a lot of levers. Businesses spontaneously do not innovate towards green solutions. If they innovated a lot, they innovate a lot in polluting solutions in the past, but spontaneously they're not going to change and invest in green technology. So we have to reorient technical changes towards green energies. It can be done different ways. The price of carbon is one tool, but the subsidies to green industrial policies is also an important solution. And the civil society, consumers, green finance are very important consumers. They play a very important role, so it's a triangle between businesses, state, civil society. This triangle is at the heart of the fight to win in the green revolution, all the sides of the coin. And you should add a fourth corner in your triangle, which is the European budget. It's in the middle. I don't know if it's in the middle, but it's important to say that because the European budget has one specificity. There is a research program that is very strong that favors the cross-fertilization, working in common, working together. And to answer one of the questions you had earlier with a view to a topic I've worked a lot in 4 years, that is United Kingdom. Yes, I think that our common interest in certain sectors, if the British want, is to cooperate with them. I wasn't happy that they refused to participate in the Erasmus program. They want to have their own Erasmus in competition with ours, but I was very happy they finally accepted on the 24th of December to take part in the Eurobest research program. If you want to be intelligent, there are a lot with the innovative power of a lot of universities and laboratories in the UK. You know, we need to collaborate with them if you want to know the whole story. I recommend that you read my book. A bit of promotion on my work on my book. So Rodolphe Sadé, on the climate aspect, you have a testimonial to share with us. You were talking about biomethane. It's not necessarily easy to make that choice, is it? Well, I listened with a lot of attention what was said on the question of the environment. It's a major issue for all of us in the point of view of an enterprise, a business. What's important is action. We can talk about laws, taxes, but in the end, if you don't take collective actions to protect the environment, next summer we will still be talking about the same topic without having seen anything happen. So I think what's important to do, and the industry of maritime transport is moving on this topic, whether at the level of the vessels which are powered by LNG or warehouses with positive energy solutions. We're clearly active in this field. Maybe we don't talk about this enough, but it's important to say the maritime transport industry does a lot on these issues. At CMA CGM, we went even further. We said we won't use the northern route. I'd like to react on this question of innovation, because I think it's absolutely vital for Europeans. Fully agree with what Suzanne Berger said on the fact that an agency as well allocated with tens of billions of dollars each year, like the Agency for Innovation and Defense in the US cannot by itself solve all the innovation problems. And she explained that clearly. It doesn't solve all the issues. It accompanies. But we, as Europeans, have to understand how what we do within the scope of research, superior education, university education, and the civil sector, all this must be articulated intelligently with efforts that are carried out that are important in the military sector, because there is a reallocation of budget, reallocation of the budgets that are reoriented to the defense sector, and it's not over despite the crisis we've just experienced. And this first articulation is essential. And the second articulation of great importance, and we see that every day, is that when we talk about the nuclear sector, when we talk about military equipment, we talk about the very long term. The investments are done in 40 years. And investing at 40 years doesn't mean that we just lock ourselves up in the laboratory and we just work. We have to stay connected to very short-term innovation on the shorter and shorter cycles, because technology is also digital, and these great research programs, and as far as I'm concerned, these armament research programs must rely on a substrate of startups that have a development cycle which is absolutely not the same as that of a university laboratory Susan Berger mentioned, or even our great defense sector businesses. So it's this articulation that is precious and that has to be used very carefully. In the future of Europe lies on this. That all this has a cost. The Europeans have realized that. They're starting to invest, maybe not at the scale of the US, but I think that there again what's important is the speed, the momentum, and determination with which we will pursue the efforts. The European Defence Fund did not exist, and those who say it's not enough, well, fine, but since there was nothing, it's already great progress. I'm very satisfied that something exists now, but this effort must be pursued in duration, in time, and we should not lose the benefit of other investments that are carried out elsewhere and that need to be done with synergy, because the synergy is essential, is key. Otherwise, we're just dispersing ourselves and wasting money. Susan Smith? Oh, no, I'm sorry. No.
On sustainability investment and impact investment has left the station. We're not talking hundreds of billions, we're talking trillions that are being reallocated. And even more trillions are being judged by investor scoring on whether they are complying with sustainability. There's one little problem for Europe that we need to solve collectively. The average profitability of US firms is significantly higher than European firms. That money will walk to the US if we only solve it on the subsidy side and so on in Europe. We will have to create the incentives at the profit level, otherwise the money will walk. It's something we don't talk enough about in Europe, but for many, many reasons, which I could explain, there is a dynamic that US profitability is higher, which is why the money will chase the US system first. And that's why a lot of the innovations that actually happen in Europe, we talked about the Pfizer one, well, it got acquired by the US and the profit goes to the US. And so we really need to figure out in Europe how the incentive system in the triangle or in the triangle with Europe in the middle solves also that the incentives are such that the money that it's walking actually walks to Europe.
Est-ce que
je peux dire une chose sur rebondir sur ce que disait?
I want to say something. I fully agree with you in the biotech sector. I said earlier that the research in basic research, they have the National Research Foundation, they have the National Institute of Health, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, which is something that patronage, and in basic research they have venture capital, they have institutional investment. Big problem in Europe. How will we build a institutional investment system comparable to what we find in the US? We're very far from that. And there are all these elements, and the DARPA also. And I was a bit worried earlier at one point, but please reassure me, I was under the impression that when we negotiated the package last year, European package, some countries had tried to push that so that we save on research. Was it the case? And we finally survived on. Please reassure me, tell me it's not the case. I didn't understand. Was there a risk of doing savings on research? No, No, you seldom. You always understand well. There was a debate when we had to agree on the budget. Now we're not talking about recovery here, the recovery plan. So European debate with the pact, the agricultural reform or agreement, or everything's useful. But we need to. There's a debate if we want to adapt to change. There was this debate, yes, and they decided to preserve the research European budget, or European research budget. But I listened to both of you. I was thinking of a visit I did, very interesting. I did 2 weeks ago in Grenoble, where I visited in length the cyclotron and the CEA, and in the cyclotron. I saw the fantastic research on the COVID, on cells. It was impressive how you can enter in the heart of the cells. And at the CEA, I saw how we worked on microprocessors, miniaturizations of microprocessors. And what struck me in the explanations that were given, if I understood well, is that beyond that research, the more we move away from basic research, where we are pilots with wonderful tools like the CEA or the synchrotron, there are other such tools in Europe. And the more we move away from this basic research towards industrialization, and the less things happen here in our countries. We lose everything. And that's not possible. We need a collective capacity, political courage, to which France has its share to play, as its share, to invest together, like what we did after the COVID. To bounce on what Philippe Allion said, do you think, Michel Barnier, that the Maastricht criteria can be rediscussed, that growth investments are no longer counted as part of the deficit? Can that be? Well, good question. Right time to ask that question. I think we would have really gone very well without the COVID crisis, a lot of distress, a lot of solitude. But if we hadn't had that crisis, this question was no longer valid. Philip. Hello, Philip, are you with us? So I'm very attentive to what you're saying. It's like, but if we hadn't had that crisis, the discussion wouldn't have been open. It's open because there was this crisis and everything exploded. To say that we're not going to reimburse the debt, that wouldn't be responsible, and could create a much more serious explosion, and we have to pay back, but in time. But I think it's the right time to propose new ideas at the European level, national level, to inject new ideas in the debate, to see what could be the new tools and the governance criteria of the European budget and European economies brought together in the unique market and the single currency. I think that it's the right time. What you mentioned, some people, your ideas, others say the budget of defense, of research, of education. This debate is open, and I think it's very important in the months to come that we take our fair share. Thank you very much. Thank you all here and in the US. Thank you, Suzanne Berger, Laurence Parly, Michel Barnier, Sven Smith, Rodolphe Sade, Philippe Allion. Thank you for the quality of these exchanges. And we'll see you at the next future roundtables.